David Amerland, I am so excited to talk about the effect of the Google Plus shutdown, because part of me is angry, part of me is sad, part of me feels like our friendship in some way built off it. Part of me feels it was one of the best products they ever produced, and I do give them credit for bringing it down some, so I'm a little critical, but I also have compassion how complicated it is to run an international global company. Great to have you here and talk about it, because it's happening now. It's breaking. We got mourning and grieving and anger, all the things that happen, and joy for people going finally instead.
It is, and we're smiling because we're connecting. Martin, you're quite right. The connection started in Google Plus, and here we are sort of like 7 years later, and we're doing this. And it couldn't be sort of worse circumstances, really, because a lot of people are feeling really bad about it. They've spent and invested a lot of time and effort building up, not just content, but for many, their digital identity on the web. And that's going to be taken away now. Mm-hmm. And that is really, really sad. And this is something which Google, unfortunately, has slipped up on. But let's start by saying exactly what's happening and why.
Yes.
Essentially, the problem started in 2015, apparently, if we to believe their report, where the permissions which they give to apps, developer apps, as we sort of download them from Google Play Store, they ask for certain permissions, and those permissions access certain parts of our account through the Google Plus API. Mm-hmm. Now, some of the information which they can potentially access is information which we may not want them to. So this is a data breach problem. Now, if that had happened a year ago, probably we wouldn't be having this kind of reaction. It's happened now, and it's happened in the context of Cambridge Analytica, which has been accused of doing all sorts of illegal things, where they basically abused millions and millions of accounts from Facebook. They took that data privately, and then they used it to manipulate the social web. So we have here multiple breaches of trust, which are leading to potential legislative action against a social technical platform. In this particular case, Facebook. And Google essentially did not want to be in the same boat.
It's also
so what they've done is they...
I want to also mention GDPR
exactly,
is another reason, because Europe's going, you can't stalk me without my permission, is the way I put it,
Well, the GDPR laws are very sweeping, and we're not quite sure yet of their potential effect.
Right.
Because they haven't been put into exact application just yet. They are in effect. A lot of companies are trying to comply with them. But that compliance is a very broad one, because we haven't had any legal cases to look at exactly the details, which means that people are being tremendously cautious about, especially in Europe, especially and in the States, where when it comes to certain United States-based websites being accessed from Europe. And I think there's a couple of newspapers, and I can't remember whether it was Washington Post, one of them, where I used to access it from Europe, where I'm based, and now sometimes I can't because of that. But, these are the effects of this, from a certain perspective, justified and justifiable scare about what's happening with our data and how our privacy is actually being breached. Google's reaction to this? Well, they did two things. One is questionable from an ethical point of view, but it's perfectly legal. And the other one is perhaps questionable from a loyalty point of view, but again, it's perfectly legal. So let's look at the first thing they did. They looked at the potential breach of privacy laws and data, which came through this API hole, and they decided that basically it didn't trigger any of the 7 steps which have in place, which would require them to make it public. They decided, within their legal rights, not to publicize it, because if they did, then they would basically be branded in the same sort of brush as Facebook, which was a much bigger, much more serious breach. But from a technical perspective, if you're a layman, you don't really see that. You just see that it's the same sort of problem. And they would probably invite legislative oversight and scrutiny at a time when they didn't want to do that. So they decided to keep quiet about it until now. And then in order to avoid the problem altogether, they decided that since the breach came through the Google Plus API, they're going to close down the consumer side of the Google Plus platform, which is what we use, and they're going to keep the corporate side, which goes to the G Suite, which has a lot more secure parameters and security. So essentially, to all intents and purposes, Google Plus is being shut down. It's going away. They will have 10 months until this happens, and we have to go and at some point and pick up our data through some kind of interface, which they're going to give us if we want to, and go on our merry way. So this social experiment has come to an end from Google's point of view. Multiple things there. The obvious one is the one we started with. For people who are actually participants in on that platform, it was part of the digital identity building process. They invested a lot of themselves. They lost a lot of their personality. It's a kind of platform which enabled people from across the world to meet, connect, be very authentic, be very real, and actually have real relationships with people they've never met before. I've known people who actually have been they formed companies together, they started working, and they have never met physically, and they met on Google+. As it happens, other people met their partners there, as in sort of the people they got married to eventually, and a lot of people met others, and they formed some kind of global community because they come from different parts of the world, and now they feel that they're all being left hung out to dry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to me, Google Plus, I was there in the very beginning, and it was coming down the pike, and I went, finally, Google's taking on the social realm, and I watched them study the anatomy of what other systems have, and I built a much better platform. Now, my personal criticism of Google, and that's because I want them to succeed, is that they're masterful of creating amazing platforms, but they're terrible at marketing their own platform, building education to teach people on the platform, and being compassionate about the impact on loyalty of the people engaged with the platform. And the people from Mountain View have to get out of Mountain View and start showing up in some small towns in Europe and America and look in the eyeballs of people if they want to stay fiercely competitive. So that's my sermon, and I'm sticking to it.
And I think the points you made are both, they're important and they're 100% accurate. As it happened, Google Plus was a far superior platform stroke product to anything else we'd seen before. It gave us more flexibility, more freedom, the ability to do more things better than ever. From a technical point of view, it was brilliant. It was complex, and that complexity became the first stumbling block. There were no ways that you could sort of easily monetize it from a personal point of view, and that became the second stumbling block, which again impacts on the marketing. And the third thing, of course, is that from Google is a very data-centric company that can be very remote and sort of faceless. And when they make decisions like this, they appear very ruthless, which is what it looks like in this case. You're right that it is a unique case because this is the first time when they basically destroy a global social network. In the past, they had products and they pulled the plug on them. Those who used the products were very passionate about them. But a product, more or less, is something which you use without investing a lot of yourself in, whereas a social technical platform network is something where you put a lot of effort, a lot of time, a lot of thinking in. And when that goes away, part of you, which you have built up, also goes away. And this is the difference here. It's going to have an impact on the Google brand. That's now, it's a given. How much of an impact, we don't know. It's going to affect loyalty and trust at a time when perhaps Google and companies like Google need it the most. Again, we're going to see the repercussions as things go forward. But these are the negative things. There's also a lot of positive things. We all learned on that platform to work differently. It was sort of several orders of magnitude above Facebook at the time, and Facebook has since copied a lot of the features, although the context in how they use them is not the same. We basically learned so many things there. We learned how to work asynchronously and carry out complex arguments over 2-3 days. We learned to be a lot more open, a lot more authentic. We learned to be able to put stuff out there which we have in terms of ideas and insights, and be prepared to defend it with evidence without blowing up and thinking that this is the end of the world if we're proven wrong. And it became part of a global learning process that elevated so many people in so many different areas, particularly in the early days. It was search and marketing and branding and identity building for companies. But since then, it's gone on to be photographers and artists and scientists and musicians, and all these people sort of benefited hugely from the interaction.
Yes, I think so. And I think there were a lot of great things. And like you said, something very important. Was it Waves? Was that one of their projects they did?
Yes,
right?
Yes.
I knew when I was playing with Waves, its days could be numbered. And there were a lot of those things where this experiment we're doing, I'm a beta tester with it. I'm jumping into play. Let's see how it works and see what occurs. So that's different. But this is something where they worked hard to earn our trust. They worked hard to bring us in. The other thing is, companies are really good at killing things off and not mourning the death. And I want to give a good example of this. There's a local car wash near there, and they had a mascot named Soapy. And Soapy died, and they said, what should we do? Because they're really brokenhearted. And I said, own the death of Soapy. Let's put a plaque on the wall. Let's appreciate Soapy. Let's own it. And then it was a stray. Why don't you adopt another stray? You see, that is a core element to me in corporate ethics that needs to be learned, if any are listening, that's still not there. And it may be that the individual leaders haven't done the soul work themselves to face the death, own it, embrace it, and move on. And I want your comment on that, because I actually think that's a value I have that I do my best to do. Someone just asked me, what if I try this fundraiser for $2,000 and nothing works? Well, say we raised 100 out of 2,000. Thank you very much. We didn't reach it, but we appreciate you. And you could see, that was a new concept.
Yes.
Well, the corporate world's great at killing off their children and not even mourning their death. It's a cold way of putting it. Yes. And I think it's an important lesson they need to learn if they want to keep building loyalty. I want your comment on that. And then there's some other things I want to make sure I covered that I made notes on too.
Okay, definitely. And I think, again, you're raising an incredibly important point that has been at the forefront of many digital discussions or discussions about the digital space since the very beginning. It's like, how do we humanize it? How do we humanize companies? How do we make sure that the connection between the company and its audience is a human one at every step? And that's exactly how not to do it, as they did it here. Mm-hmm. You're right that they need to step up, own it, understand it. Google is a paradox, perhaps, or perhaps not, in a company that has very talented, very passionate, very driven people who are visionaries in many ways. Mm-hmm. And then they fail to bridge the last mile when they basically create those products and get them to the audience that's to use it. And they do it in a sort of very impersonal, very technocratic way, which makes them look robotic almost. And I'm not sure how they could possibly change it here. Certainly, it will take a culture change, which will have to come from the top, clearly. But in this particular case, they failed to do that pretty much every step of the way. It was introduced to us as an amazing platform. We adopted it. They kept bringing in fantastic features. We kept using them, and then some of them kept going away, and there's no explanation why this was happening. So I think I understand that they made decisions based on data, but those decisions may not give them the kind of brand impact that they think they could get from them.
Well, I'm going to say, I think I know what they should do. They should get someone to step forward with a face on it. And we've got a great leader in America, the Indian gentleman's name. I just drew a blank on his name. Anyway.
The CEO, yes.
I'm tired. But get forward or something like that. Come forward and say, we want to announce what's occurring. We want to thank everyone who was on our journey for it. These are reasons of doing it. It's a loss to many people who have loved us. Thanks for your trust. We regret that it's ending. Here's what we're doing to do our best to help out. At the bottom of the line, we do have to be held accountable, that we keep the company viable so we can do more things. And thank you. Thank you for trusting us. Thank you for working. And we regret that there's a loss. And I think that would blow it away. I mean, it's just like, I want to just say, I did a talk on reputation, and I said, what would have happened if BP had the oil spill and then the president, instead of going on a sailing trip, ruined a 10 grand suit getting knee deep in that oil? You know,
Yes.
What would have happened if Toyota, when we had that scare on Toyota, an Asian CEO with beautiful children came to America in a southern town with a translator and said, my children ride in these cars too? What would have happened if the phone service, Samsung, who's blowing up everywhere, got a CEO and go, I'm carrying this in my pocket. This is serious, And they're so afraid of, to me, liability grows the more we dehumanize. And I don't know where they're getting the message, if it's bad attorneys or what, but in life, my experience is dehumanize, I'm hurt, I want to sue. This doesn't seem to be advanced math. And so I just want to say that, then we'll get on to and make sure it's not too far. But I am hoping. I do love Google. I love the brilliance. I want them to see. My upset isn't because I don't care. It's because I care so much.
Yes. I think most of us are in the same boat. And you're making, again, a tremendously important point about vulnerability. And companies are very reluctant to appear vulnerable. They're very reluctant to show that human side, which would engender empathy from our side, and we could understand better, and they could understand us better. So I think until we get the kind of leadership which is capable of making that kind of risky decision, they're going always to err on the side of caution, which trips them up, which is what the examples which you shared with us, which didn't happen and could have happened, is exactly that kind of thing.
I want to talk a little bit about the reality of it shutting down. What should individuals know and do? And what are lessons that we should take away? Fool me once, you got me. Fool me twice, I'm the fool type thing. Where do they go? I've got like 12 groups. My social media management, I make them be on Google Plus, not because it's relevant, but because it forces them to learn the anatomy of all the other platforms. It was built off of it. Yes. I say, I want you to be mad at me. I want you to go, I don't understand this, because you're going to have to do that with the next hoo-hoo platform or Snapchat version 5 that comes out anyway. So I've built it as core for what genius went into it. And so that's why I want is your advice to the listener. What do we do now? You're involved, you build identities. What's your professional advice and the impact on search from the business perspective?
Okay, this is a multi-layered question.
Yes, so I know. But, I don't know any other way.
All right. So let's look at basically, we need to look at a few things here. The first one is the state of search. The second thing is the state of development of the web. And the third thing is how socio-technical platforms, social media networks, basically, are evolving and what's happening. And within all that, how do we operate? So there are 4 elements. So let's begin with search to begin with. Search used to be very data vertical driven, which meant that essentially, if you had a box, you had to be found within that box. And if you had another box, you had to be found in that box. And connecting those 2 boxes from a search point of view was relatively difficult because it could not ascertain the importance and the connection and so on. And that's changing now. It started changing since semantic search came in around 2012. It's been, with every iteration, it's getting better and better. The social signal was very important in that respect. So what we were doing in different social media platforms was critical to how we were going to be perceived by search eventually, because it's building up an entity of ourselves, which meant it needed to have a very clear idea of who we were and what we did. What's changing is that essentially search engines are employing artificial intelligence, they're employing machine learning algorithms. They are not as driven by linear data as the algorithms of the past. So essentially they can pick up very minute changes and points which would have been missed. They go through massive data sets very, very quickly. They pick up patterns of behavior in that. They have patterns mapped within certain specific profile signatures, which means that essentially we don't need these days to be as socially active on a platform for a search algorithm to pick up who we are and what we do. And this is something which is going to get better and better and better as we're moving forward into the future. So this deprecates the importance of social activity in terms of building an identity to some extent. We look at now how the web is evolving. Basically, we've gone from a web where we used to have the boxes we were in, which were usually silos, and they were the websites. Then we went to social media platforms, and they were the new thing and became something amazing and well connected. And now we're beginning to see that within that connection, new walls and new barriers are going up, and also new threats, which hadn't existed in the past. And those threats have to do with how our data is being used, how specific things of what we do are being mined, analyzed, and then used to manipulate us. In worst case scenario, they become very manipulative. In the best case scenario, they lead to sort of lapses of security, which could potentially lead to something and usually don't. Now, the next thing is how the platforms themselves are evolving, and they're evolving into verticals. You know, social media platforms were designed to give us a playground to play in, even when it was the Facebook's walled garden. And these days it becomes very siloed, very contained, and they tend to sort of grab that information and use it for themselves. Understandable, because they're free to use, and at some point they need to have some kind of benefit from our activity. But from our perspective, when we invest so much time, effort, attention, and skill eventually into building something up, we should be seeing more direct benefits than just, you know, here's your avatar and here's your group and here are your interests and good luck with it. And finally, how is all this now coming together and being connected, which will answer your question essentially, what do we do from here? As individuals, as digital individuals, or rather as individuals who have reached a level of digital maturity, we are now at the stage where we need to take full control of who we are, what we do, where we do it, how we control that data. We need to take the skill sets which we've developed in the social media networks, still have a presence there, with a caveat that we know that it may be temporary, we know it may be locked away, we know that the benefits which we enjoy may just end, and use them as a net to funnel everything we can towards something which we control. If that is a website, so be it. If that is some kind of other entity, it could be an app, or it could be, you know, presence in somewhere else, which is an open source platform perhaps, and we're comfortable dealing with that. But that should be the place where we focus our energy, and that should be the place where we lead everybody else to find us.
Could that be like your email list where you keep paying, you own it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It could be something like that. Essentially, it feels a little bit like a step back into the past where, you know, everybody said, you know, you build a funnel, you lead people into that, and then you start filtering from people to leads to converts and sales. It is and it isn't. It's a much broader than that. It's much more nuanced, because now we're not sort of so much driven by the razzmatazz of technology where, oh, this is a new shiny, we'll need to sign up for it. We are driven by the connections of the relationships we build and a full awareness of the value that those connections give to us at a personal level. So if, for instance, you know, you bring out a newsletter and I happen to know that the newsletter is full of insights which I can benefit directly from, and it saves me hours and hours and hours of research and thinking, then definitely it's to my benefit to get to your website, sign up for it, and get it every week or every month. So that's the kind of approach now that we are applying to this. So it leads to a more nuanced behavior from our part.
Another one might be the importance of the CMR that you control. Like I use Nimble, I'm an advocate as a social CRM, and it at least attempts to interface versus just trusting that the contact on LinkedIn is safe enough. You know, if they're important, I move them over to Nimble because I've been burned enough.
Yes.
That now if I just meet someone quick and I go, I'm not sure where those develop, but I like them enough, I want to connect, they may stay on LinkedIn. But if there's any chance I want to touch again, I'm moving them to the CRM because I control, and that's so important. It's, you know, what I call, there's a statement, owned, earned, Own, earned, and something else.
And bought. It's like owned, earned, and bought.
And bought, right. Own, earned, and bought. Thank you. And you're saying let's make sure that we're managing what we own,
Yes.
because the earned to me is going to be the integrity and quality of us interacting with the world, instead of just the earned we got on Facebook that could be locked out tomorrow or something like that. Is that where you're saying?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Essentially, now we're in the process of making applying critical judgment to how much of our time and attention and skills to invest in every particular social network. We know that we have to do some. We're very precise now in prioritizing. I'm going to spend an hour on LinkedIn, for instance, and 30 minutes on Twitter, and perhaps 5 minutes on Facebook, or whatever combination actually gives you the best ROI. And this is a very nuanced approach. In the past, we didn't have a lot of choice because it was, here's the thing, here are the tools you have, and that's what you got to do. And now we have flexibility to do whatever we want. So the question is, if you can do whatever you want, then it's up to you as an individual to basically take ownership of what you're building and decide, okay, this is what I'm going to do, and this is why I'm going to do it. So that leads to a little bit of introspection. This is the maturity that we're reaching on the web, that now we actually need to think critically. What is it that I want to do? Do I just want to passively consume information? Well, I don't need to be on any social media platform. I can just join a few RSS lists and get all the information I need. Do I need some kind of filtering? Well, then you need to perhaps join some group, go to some kind of forum, go to some social media platform and join a particular set of people. Do I need to create a marketing persona which will lead to sales and help me and so on? Great. This is what you need to do. You need to have a LinkedIn presence. You need to have a Twitter presence. You need to have some kind of community group you belong to. And then you need to basically create the kind of content that projects convincingly what you do so people can make an informed opinion. So these are the practices which now become part of a very semantically dense, if you like, digital existence.
I think that's excellent. And so that's one thing we learned from Google Plus, because I built it all out there and now it's going away. And I think another thing is for them to listen out to what Google gives us to extract that data. But also, from my understanding of GDPR, we have to be responsible of the data we're collecting. I'm now moving to, if you said remove all presence of you in my system, I want to be able to quickly take that out. Where am I collecting that data too? So that's another layer I thought of, is not just be a vacuum sucking in data, but also what's important I need to remove. Like in our social media class, there are all types of great tips and stuff we added. So if I could extract that, I do it. Now from the cloud wars we've been in and love, I got copies of those clouds. I love those people, but I don't need their pictures of clouds, those would be two that we know of on Google Plus, and then the photography ones, I like it, but it's already past relevant. So it's fine to let that go. Is that where you're going for?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, absolutely. But also, it's an awareness now, a very nuanced awareness of the impact of what we do. So, I mean, everything which we do in the web, like everything we do in real life, from the choice of clothes we wear to the expressions we use to the tone of voice we use to communicate, everything has some kind of impact. We live in a world of metadata where people actually react to the metadata before they begin to absorb and process the data. So that intentional way of living, which we do instinctively in real life, has to be a new learned behavior, a new skill set, which we develop in a digital world. And that's the new maturity of the web. This is the 21st century digerati, if you like.
I want to add something, though, that I think you have also mentioned in your great book on the sniper's mind, is there's a way to live in the world like I make no difference. And there's a way to live in the world as I make a difference. And I actually say, as living I make a difference is a more responsible way to live in the world, because then you're thinking about what you aren't controlling every word, but you're thinking, I don't know there is a ripple effect of my being in this world. Yes. And it's also more rewarding one. So I don't know that we're conscious personally, as you say, at the personal level. I mean, I do my best to live in the world as Martin makes a difference in the world. And there was a point I didn't. And if you look at what's happened as far as making a difference from that 35-year on before, it's like this much where people have said, you've made a difference in my life, to not as much information on it. So I want to weave that in, because I think it's something you live out of as well. And it is related back to this. I know it seems off the reservation from Google.
No, this is really relevant. It's absolutely relevant. And thank you for bringing it up in that way. You're right. The context of our lives has changed. And this is part of the 21st century digital technology we have at our fingertips. I mean, what we're doing right now, we're going across time zones, we're going across country borders, and all this has disappeared. And what we are doing, tens of thousands of people are doing at this very moment. They're exchanging information, closing business deals, discussing about startups, sharing ideas. And all this is changing the world one little thing at a time. And then when it comes to video, which goes live, other people are going to consume it, learn from it, think about it, and they're going to change their lives because of that. So it's going to have further impact. So we all now have greater responsibility than we ever had before. And the thing is, we're not hardwired for that. We're hardwired to have, very small, very local, very immediate groups and impact. So this is part of how we learn to behave in a digital world. We have to learn new skill sets. We have to learn to think before we speak. We have to learn to analyze things before we think we got them. So these are the skill sets which are taking us forward. And to get back on the subject, Google Plus helped us immensely to develop these behaviors. It taught us about how to use the technologies in a nuanced way. We picked up new skill sets and found out what works and what doesn't by making mistakes and learning from them and apologizing in public and saying, hey, I didn't mean to say that way. It was 3 o'clock when I said it. I don't know what I was thinking. And we've learned to be brave by sharing information, which we used to think in the past gave us a competitive advantage. And we never shared it with anybody. I had an idea and I thought, this is my idea. I'm not giving it out to anybody because I'm using it to close sales. And we put it out there and say, hey, this is what I do. And so other guys would say, yeah, that's great. And this is how I do it. And it would become enriched. So we learned that by sharing, you don't miss out. You actually gain more. By helping others, you don't sort of fall back. You actually gain and grow faster. And these are things Google Plus did for us. I think it was amazing. It's amazing still that we actually have had that kind of experience. And it makes it all the much sadder that it's going away. But it's also part of the natural evolution of things. Nothing can stand still forever.
Absolutely. Well, I'd like to move to, I think we covered a lot of great points on this. And I do want to say I'm greatly appreciative of Google Plus, because when I've known you, Martin, that I've gotten to meet too, there's so many great people that occurred on it, that we touched lives, we helped each other. And so I do want to thank Google for doing it, but also hope they learn themselves something from this in their culture and learn something else, because I do think earning loyalty actually means you have to do some things. You can't just write a check anymore. And I do want them to learn also, and I have compassion to how hard it is to do, how big it is, and it is going to move slower and all those. I'd like to end this by going, what does it mean in the evolution of the web and Google as a whole? Kind of you're looking in the fortune of the future. Where do you see next? And we already said, let's pay attention to what changes. I'll put in the message area, but what's next? Where are we going? You kind of covered that, but I'd like your closing thing of where you see the future is as of, this time period today in October 2018.
Okay. Well, here's what's happening across the web. We are seeing that privacy is more important than ever. We are seeing the critical role that data these days plays on practically everything, from elections to marketing to sales to personal relationships to just making friendships. And we also see that there's increased scrutiny from a legislative point of view on these companies which grow so big that to some extent they become unaccountable because they're massive and nobody's there to provide oversight. And all these things are in a process of evolution as we move forward. Google itself is no longer Google, really. It's Alphabet, which is another different entity, which is much bigger and a lot more corporate, and thinks and acts differently to Google. I know we say Google, but it's not. It's Alphabet. It's Alphabet that's decided to close down Google+. So we can argue that everything's evolving towards perhaps from a corporate point of view, larger, more faceless, more automated, and more distant from us. While at the same time, we as individuals are evolving towards a more granular relationship where we are more nuanced in our behavior, have more data at our fingertips, have more control over that data, and are now in a position to consciously take more control of our behavior within that space. So we have now to the dynamic where the companies are becoming less human and we're becoming more human. So really, there's going to be a shift in power from them supplying the platforms to actually us controlling the data. And it's going to be a gradual shift, but it's heading that way. That makes it all the more imperative that we actually understand what we're doing. And I speak for myself here, as well as many of my colleagues whom I've discussed this in the past. We really don't, not just yet. It's a complex thing. We're sort of understanding and devising techniques as we go along because we're making up the rules of the future. But what is key here is empathy at a human level and responsibility in our actions. And if we apply those two things as we move forward, then the decisions which we make are likely to be better ones as opposed to bad ones. And that's the only guidance I can make in terms of predictions. How are we going to evolve as individuals on the web? Well, we're going to have more control over what we do, whether we begin to center everything on the websites we own or open source platforms where we control the data which we share is open to question, but that's where it's heading. And this is what we need to keep in mind.
Excellent. And of course, what's the best way for people listening and watching to learn more of what you're doing? I'm going to ask people, I want to tell you, I'm going to be relaunching my own podcast. So this is intended to be one of the shows once it gets out, but I want to hear from you. How can people reach you and keep up with all your great stuff?
Great. Well, you can find me on my website at davidamerland.com. And these days you can also find me on the snipermind.com, where I put all of the original research and neuroscience news on how the mind works within that context of making decisions. And these days you can also find me on Twitter and LinkedIn and still on Google Plus until it shuts down.
Right, and I'll be there too. And what I ask is if people got value out of this, and also I'd love for you to subscribe to my channel. I am, as I told you, I'm going to be ramping up. This is my personal channel where I decided I have so many interests. I'm just going to build a show that encompasses all the ones that I love and the Renaissance quality I value in life to share it. So that's what it's calling. You'll be Inquire Online. It's a reboot, and we'll be getting the show on that as well, and just get them in there. So excited to move forward with it. And we'll be bringing you back, of course. So thanks so much. It's great talking.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate this.